When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him. On their way they entered a village of the Samaritans to make ready for them. But they did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. When his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them. Then they went on to another village. This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated.
Will you pray with me? God of love and God of grace, this is your time, and we are your people. Open our hearts, our minds, and our lives to your presence, that we would hear your word and respond with all that we are. Amen. So we begin Lent. We began on Wednesday, and this is the first time we worship together in this season. As I said earlier in worship, it's this time to face so many things that maybe we would rather not. But I think if we're not honest with ourselves in our places of weakness and our places of struggle and our places where we really need healing, then we're not offering our fullest selves to the beauty of what resurrection can do at Easter. To really encounter the power of God's love and grace to make us whole and make our world whole if we don't really begin to deal with the things that need healing. So today we face these questions. How do we respond in pain? How do we respond with heartbreak, insult, rejection, anger? Be it in the gospel text today or be it in our world when we have another tragedy and we grieve more and we argue more and we work out again and again what it means to try to find healing and wholeness. How do we face those things honestly and openly? That's the invitation. We all maybe sit in different spectrum of the emotions we're feeling inside, either that we've experienced over the course of this week or we've experienced over the course of the last few months or years, wherever you came from today. Aside from the news, aside from current events, aside from the lives that were taken in Florida, we all also just come with our own human stories, our own heartbreaks, our own worries, the times and places that we've been rejected, the times and places we have felt deep, burning anger and frustration, the times that we have wondered, what's the best thing here? Because the human instinct kicks in, that fight or flight mechanism that maybe we don't always feel like we have good control over, starts moving into action. And we've got choices to make about how we respond to things that happen in our lives, in the relationships that we're a part of in our lives, let alone the events that happen in our world and how we choose to engage, be it on social media or face-to-face. How do we respond in those moments of pain, rejection, loss, grief, anger? And those options of fight or flight that kick in, are those the only options that we really have? To talk honestly about that mess that's rolling along inside of each of us, let alone rolling around in our world right now. That is the task of this season. To talk honestly and openly. And to see where Christ responds and moves and offers us a way that may be different. I think we got to engage that raw humanity that's inside of us. I hope you hear me saying as we have the conversation over the coming 6 weeks together, it is not to ignore feelings of fear or anger or frustration. It's not to push those down or push them out of the way and instead just think happy thoughts and be optimistic. That is not what we're trying to do. The hope is that we face those things honestly and openly, that we might move through them and be transformed in the catalyst that those things bring about inside of us if we face them well. and also if we don't face them alone. As you're maybe thinking about those personal moments, as you're thinking about those times that your heart's been broken, or maybe you're thinking about the grief you feel inside at more lives lost, or the anger you feel about whatever we ought to do next, or your own times of isolation or loneliness. As you have those things in your heart and mind, let's maybe put those stories alongside what we see in the gospel today. Because we have some interesting opportunities of the disciples and Jesus figuring out different ways to deal with rejection and anger and frustration. Where do we find ourselves in the story? And what opportunities does the gospel story give our lives? This moment in Luke really picks up from where we were last week. We were in Mark's gospel last week as Jesus was transfigured on top of this mountain, this miracle on the mountain, where God's presence is made known in this remarkable way. Jesus is turned into this like glowing disco ball kind of scene that blinds everyone with the dazzling shining of his presence in his clothes. And then Moses and Elijah show up, because that's something that happens every day. And Peter, James, and John are witness to this, and they see God revealed in Jesus in this unique, tangible, physical way. And their response is a very human one. Peter says, let's just hang out here. This is way better than anything else I've ever seen. Can we just build shrines here, live here? This is really great. And Jesus says, no. Nice idea, appreciate the enthusiasm, but no. The point that God's voice literally speaks in the text is, this is my son, listen to him, follow him. And Jesus says, if you're going to listen to me and follow me, I'm going back down the mountain to the rest of our lives and the journey ahead. And so maybe begrudgingly, maybe enthusiastically, though I would have a hard time being as enthusiastic, they pack up and go back down the mountain with Jesus. And here, we're not in Mark's gospel where that picks up, but we pick up in the same place after this has happened in Luke's gospel. They come down the mountain from this massive miracle of Jesus being revealed as God's presence here on earth with us. And he sets his face to Jerusalem. Now that may seem like just a nice little textual thing. Oh, that's nice. Jesus wants to go to Jerusalem now. That's wonderful. It is a deeply significant thing in Luke's gospel that this is a turning point in the story. Jesus has been transfigured. He is seen clearly as God's presence on earth, and now he is going to face the culmination of his story and face the cost of his story with whatever is in front of him. And that is rooted in Jerusalem, the holy city, the place where the temple is present, the center of religious and political and economic life for his day and his people. He's going to bring the presence of God that he carries within his very being to head on face the deepest fissures and needs and hopes and fears of his people. And he has a sense of the cost of this. He's talked, kind of alluding all around this, that where this is going is not going to be easy. If you're going to listen to me and follow me, if you're going to listen and follow me changed by God and Jesus, you're going to encounter people who don't always agree. People who maybe don't think that Jesus is the presence of God on earth. Not that we would ever have those disagreements anymore among us, or even among Christians about what that would mean. You're going to encounter people who not only disagree with you, but might want to hurt you because what you say threatens their position of security, or threatens their position of power, or just the way things are, because people just don't like to change very much. We could probably take a poll in here. That's one of those things, aside from public speaking, that many people fear deep in their core, that things are going to change. Even if life isn't always good, we kind of like having our expectations and routines in our lives, yes? Following Jesus is going to bring a change. And not just a change of diet or a change of exercise or a change of schedule. It is going to change our deeply rooted sense of self and identity if we let it. And that might just change our political and economic and religious ways of being in the world. He's setting his face to bring the presence of God fully into every aspect of human existence. And after all of this, the first thing that happens is they get a door slammed in their face. They've just seen Jesus transfigured, the very presence of God there, and he is like, I am setting my face to Jerusalem. We are going. But we kind of need to stay somewhere for the night. And they're in some territory that is not super open to a Jewish way of being. They're in Samaria with Samaritans. You'll also know Luke talks about the Good Samaritan and other folks. There is tension here, different ways of worship, different ethnicity, different culture. And after all of this buildup of Jesus' holiness and God's presence in Jesus, they get rejected right out of the gate. I mean, imagine that bubbling, boiling enthusiasm if you are one of Jesus' best friends and biggest cheerleaders. Yes, Jesus, I'm there with you. I'll give my life for you. I'm going to go everywhere you say. I'm going to do everything you say. I'm going to follow you to the ends of the earth. If you say jump, I'll say how high. If you go off a cliff, I'm going right after you. And then whenever you say, hey, neighbor, can we just have a place to sleep tonight? And they know, wait, you're not one of us. Oh, wait, where are you going, traveler? You're going to Jerusalem? No. I want no part of this. You can sleep on the street for all I care. There's a lot of disappointment, to say the least. This is not how the plan was supposed to go because Jesus has hyped us up that we are going somewhere and doing something. And I think James and John have a pretty human response, a fight or flight thing in the face of rejection or heartbreak or insult, and they just want to burn it down. They're rejected, and they say, hey, Jesus, can we just call fire down on these people? How many of us have ever wanted to just call down fire in a moment and not just rhetorical fire in a Facebook argument? Man, that is a human thing. You broke my heart. Oh. You insulted me or my mother or my family. Oh. You went to that college that I don't really like, or y'all beat me in football. Oh. But those also, those other things too. The way you believe about the government offends my sensibilities. The way you would respond to this tragedy deeply offends something inside of me. The way you would worship or the way you would see the top priority of our faith, that really gets under my skin. And it would just be easier for me if you didn't exist right now so I could just go about my business. Thank you very much. I think they thought they were offering a good idea because just moments ago they had been up on top of this mountaintop, and who was there? Elijah was there. Elijah was a prophet who was known from time to time to administer God's justice by calling down fire and wiping off enemies off the map. So I think they're saying, Jesus, we just saw this guy, and man, do you remember he did some things that I think would really help us right now? Like kind of teacher's pet trying to really be over enthusiastic to say, here's how we can solve this problem. I think it's a very understandable emotion. I think it's more understandable than what Jesus says because Jesus decides to get onto these guys. I think this is the point in the movie where you're like, come on, man, give the guys a break. Come on. Because he gets onto him and it's like he's saying, okay, we were just on top of this mountaintop together. You were just there with me. God's voice physically, verbally spoke to you. Wouldn't we all love to have that kind of moment? Saying clearly, listen to Jesus, follow Jesus. You're being prepared to follow this man. And he's like, what have I been doing? At what point in Jesus' ministry with these guys for years has he ever decided that opposition, the way to handle that was just to wipe them off the face of the earth? When have they seen that happen? Like literally 0 times. Right before this transfiguration moment in Luke, like the teaching he gives, just maybe in the collection of teachings before this, he sends people out to minister on their own in his name. And he says, hey, if you go somewhere and they reject you, you don't get mad at them. Okay, maybe you feel anger, but you don't take it out on them. What you do is you go to the edge of town, you dust off your sandals, and you just say, God bless you, I'm going on to the next town. Now, I've heard some people say, this is like a nice way to humbly move on. I've heard other people say, this is synonymous to going to the edge of town and doing an obscene gesture or insinuating where people can take the message that they want and where they can put it and all those kind of things. Somewhere in that is probably the truth of either a really gracious way to be rejected or a really an easier way to be indignant and handle that without hurting someone. Somewhere in there is the truth, but it is not meeting rejection with force. It is not meeting heartbreak with overpowering anger. It is a realization that God's movement is not hindered by whether or not we choose to participate. God's will being done on earth is probably not up to any one of our individual agendas. We can choose to jump in with God's rhythm. We can choose to jump in with God's all-consuming love. But God's got the end of the story figured out. It isn't up to us to accomplish everything that God wants to do. If we get to participate in it, that's awesome. But God's will being done in Samaria or Frisco or wherever is not going to be because, man, I took matters into my own hands and I forced God's will to be done on earth, whether you liked it or not. Jesus says, no, that's not the way we're going to do this. He goes on, and we'll, spoiler alert, talk more about this next week, but he goes on to talk about what being fully consumed by the love of God looks like. And it's not giving in to those very human emotions underneath everything when the fight or flight kicks in, when you're rejected, when you're heartbroken, when you're angry. You don't give into that and what might come from acting out of that anger. It's a more disciplined response where you maybe take a moment, reassess what the top priorities are in the moment. And if the top priorities for Jesus are life and life abundant, which he says in John 10, maybe wiping off your neighbor, even if they're your enemy, off the face of the earth is not bringing about human thriving. So maybe if people are going to thrive and you're not going to agree, maybe it's best to take a moment and we'll move along. We'll find a place to sleep for the night. It's going to be okay. This day does not make or break the will of God being achieved in our lives. And all of the humanity of this moment, God's love is going to be bigger than how we would choose to either give in to those feelings that are deeply painful and uncomfortable for us, or if we give in to something greater. We'll pick up on what happens next in the coming weeks. But I think it's good for us to sit with what does it mean when we have that response of deep, be it rage, be it anxiety, be it worry, be it anger, be it frustration or heartbreak. Where is Jesus saying, don't give in to the harm that may be done if you give in to the worst desires you're feeling? Where is there another alternative, not to do harm, but to do good? That's an echo of John Wesley and his encouragement to Methodists. Where is the encouragement, not to give in to what you would personally want to have happen right now, but to see that you're part of a bigger picture? Instead of giving in to those emotions that, though they are very real, and I think it's good to feel those feelings, not bringing about destruction, but trying to create love and thriving in life. I have a mentor who believes that those feelings of rejection and anger and anxiety, all of those are rooted in fear. Fear, and also Yoda says this, the fear within us will bring about responses of anger. Fear is an easy door to open up the response of wanting to just burn it all down. Fear is a way to bring about the overpowering response to meet rejection with force or meet insult with force. Jesus offers an alternative all the time, and he offers it clearly to his disciples there. Do you give in to an all-consuming fear that would lead to harm, or do you give in to an all-consuming love that might bring more life? How do we honestly face those things within ourselves, let alone the rest of the world? At least I know for myself it's about what motivates me in any given decision that I'm trying to make, in any relationship, be it at work or in my home, or when I think about my place in the rest of the world. Do I make decisions based on a fear that nobody loves me or nobody likes me, and so I need to act out so that people see me, love me, just pay attention to me? Do I act out of fear that I'm not going to have enough, be it love, be it money, be it the resources I need to survive, and so I got to take what I need out of fear that I don't have enough or that I'm not worth enough? Am I motivated by that sense of scarcity in myself, or scarcity that no one's looking out for me, or scarcity that the world is against me, which would lead me to act out in anger, or act out in violence or force, or act out in all of these ways that can bring harm or can bring wounds and pain? Or am I motivated by a deeper sense of love? Fear, I think, is what clicks off in that fight or flight sense. I got to do something. I got to get out of here, or I got to make this right. Being in the all-consuming love of God, I hope for myself and each of us would change that narrative of fear to a narrative that I have enough, that I am enough, that I'm not alone, that I belong, that I can trust that I belong to the people who are around me, be it my family, be it my coworkers, be it my school, that I'm not alone in the sense of anxiety or fear or anger. But there are people who hear me, there are people who see me, there are people who love me. Would that sense of love cause me to act differently and make different choices? That other people would know that they're loved because I would share that love with them. That other people know that they belong. That if I'm frustrated or angry, I wouldn't choose to harm or cause fear in someone else. But I might choose a different course of action where we can honestly face the grievance that happened, but create some outcome of love on the other side of it. What is the other outcome that would lead us to love? What is the thing that would change us to know that there is an all-consuming love to replace an all-consuming fear? That instead of a narrative of never being enough, never having enough, that in the all-consuming love of God, you are enough. And hopefully, if the church is bringing life to it, you will have enough. Those are the things I've been thinking about this week. I hate that we have more and more and more acts of violence and more lives taken. Students who go to school, a place that we hope is a safe place to be and a safe place to belong for their growth and their thriving, that sanctuary is violated by violence. That breaks my heart. Be it a school, be it a church, be it a park, be it your homes, wherever it is, that those places of home and thriving would be violated by violence and the taking of life is a tragedy. If I could speak the words in a sermon to make it better and to make that go away, believe me, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would love to preach peace into existence. I would love to preach hope into existence. I would love to preach life into existence. But I think that those things are beyond my limited human capability. But I see so much fear underneath the actions that lead a young man to take life. I see so much fear in the responses of very well-meaning individuals, all of us in this room, trying to figure out what to do about it. Do we meet the pain with an all-consuming fear, or do we meet our pain with an all-consuming love that might give us more possibilities than what we would conceive of if all we can think of is the fear? If we're consumed by the anger, if we're consumed by the rage, if we're consumed by the doubt. Gun violence in our country is not something that I think is just a simple thing to solve. Just by click, let's just handle it that way. I grew up in East Texas. I didn't own a lot of guns. I've shot some shotguns and some BB guns or whatever, but it's just hadn't been something that's a big deal to me in my life. But I have friends who, it was not a fear-based thing in their life to own guns. It was part of sharing in their family's history. It was part of going hunting with friends for sport. It was part of something that they genuinely helped enjoy their lives and feed their families and all of that. I get that. But I also know that's not the only narrative. There are folks who are deeply afraid and own guns because you're deeply afraid of harm happening to you, harm happening to your family. I can understand that human reaction, that human emotion, that there's fear there. I think it's an overreaction of fear to say we got to take everybody's guns and we got to make sure we control every aspect of this. I get that that's a fear-based response. I also think it's a fear-based response to say we absolutely can't change anything. And I think we're not honest with facing the pain and facing the nuance of our world if we just draw deep lines in the sand and say it's either all this or it's all this and there's no point in between. Personally, just from where Marcus Womack stands, I think it's a gun issue, but I think it's also a mental health issue. I think it's an issue for schools. I think it's an issue for law enforcement. I think it's an issue for our government. I think it's an issue for our communities. I think these are not just a one-size-fits-all problem in our world. But how do we honestly face one another, not with ideas, but with human compassion and an all-consuming love for one another's thriving? That's the only thing I can think that's going to help us get out of a cycle of saying, well, a tragedy happened, we've talked about it too soon or too late, we've kind of gotten back into the rhythm of life after we've grieved a little bit or kind of refocused our attention, and another tragedy happens and we repeat that cycle, we repeat that cycle, we repeat that cycle. If I'm invested in an all-consuming love that God has for me and God has for you, and I'm invested in that all-consuming love bringing you life and bringing me life, I hope the responses that we have are not just to refocus on whatever or just get more entrenched in wherever I stand and wherever you stand, and we're just going to shout at each other until we lose our voices. But can we honestly face the emotional needs of young men and boys in our community? Can we honestly face the needs of our schools and their safety and their funding? Can we honestly face the needs of the fear in our culture, be it perpetuated by the media, be it perpetuated by the government, be it perpetuated by whoever? The fear that says I need to be able to take a life to save a life. God gives us more possibility to live for all lives, to live for one another, to invest in one another. I want that kind of possibility for those 17 people. For Alyssa, Scott, Martin, Nick, Aaron, Jamie, Chris, Luke, Kara, Gina, Joaquin, Elena, Meadow, Alex, Carmen, Helena, and Peter. I want us to choose an all-consuming life and an all-consuming love instead of an all-consuming fear, so that their story is a turning point for where we set our face. Their story would be a turning point where we say, we're not going back the way we came. Their story would be honored by the ways that we would be changed, not seeing ourselves from a place of fear or scarcity, but seeing ourselves and our neighbor, whether we agree or disagree, as worthy of love and a thriving life and life abundant. I hope that that kind of healing and that kind of hope is possible if we face all of the complexity of our world honestly. Deeper than talking points, deeper than rhetoric, deeper than ideas, but bring our whole selves to fully love the whole selves of our neighbor, that an all-consuming love would grow. There's this hope and this promise in 1 John chapter 4 that says there's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Fear is consumed with punishment or worry, but God makes us whole in love. Whether it's in your heart or wherever you see it in our world. Can Lent be a season in your daily prayer, in your daily devotion, and every week as we gather in worship? Can this be a time that we can face honestly the places that we have fear? And maybe offer it to God in a way that say, God, take this fear and replace it with your perfect love. God, when I'm angry at my neighbor, when I'm fearful of my neighbor, take that fear and replace it with your love and your hope for me and for them. Amen.